The morning sun cast long shadows across the recreation dome of Station Kepler 442b, humanity's newest colony at the edge of known space. Children's laughter echoed through the artificial atmosphere as various species mingled in what had become the most diverse playground in the galaxy. Dr. Marcus Chan watched his 8-year-old daughter Emma chase after a group of Zephyrian younglings, their crystalline wings catching the light as they darted between the climbing structures. Marcus had been stationed here for 3 years as the colony's chief xenobiologist, studying the fascinating ecosystem of this distant world. What made Kepler 442b special wasn't just its breathable atmosphere or abundant resources, but its position as a neutral meeting ground between 7 different sapient species. The Galactic Council had designated it as humanity's first official integration colony, where human children would grow up alongside alien peers in an unprecedented experiment in interspecies cooperation. The integration hadn't been easy. When humans first arrived, many alien species were skeptical. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Most other species had millennia of spacefaring experience and established protocols. The Valkyrie considered humans too aggressive. The Thornish thought them too emotional. The crystalline Zephyrians found human behavior unpredictable and chaotic. But children, Marcus had observed, didn't carry the same prejudices as their parents. Emma had made friends quickly with younglings from multiple species. She played zero-gravity tag with Valkyrie children whose elongated limbs gave them natural advantages in the low-gravity zones. She learned to communicate through color patterns with young chromatic singers, whose species expressed emotions through shifting bioluminescent displays across their skin. She even befriended a shy Thornish child whose spiky carapace made physical contact dangerous but whose gentle nature drew her in. As Marcus watched the multi-species play session, he noticed a figure sitting alone on a bench near the edge of the playground. It was a young Kytherian, perhaps equivalent to a 10-year-old human. The Kytherians were one of the more recent additions to the colony, refugees from a devastating civil war that had torn their homeworld apart. This particular child caught his attention because she sat apart from the others, watching the games but not participating. Kytherians were humanoid in appearance, more so than most alien species. They had pale blue skin with darker markings that resembled tattoos but were actually natural pigmentation patterns that indicated their clan lineage. Their most distinctive feature was their enhanced regenerative abilities, though Marcus knew this gift came with limitations that many other species didn't understand. The young Kytherian was missing her left leg from just below the knee. Among her people, such a loss was considered a profound tragedy, not because of any physical limitation, but because of the cultural implications. Kytherian society placed enormous emphasis on physical completeness, viewing any permanent injury as a sign of spiritual imbalance or ancestral displeasure. While their regenerative abilities could heal most wounds, certain types of damage, particularly from energy weapons used in their recent war, prevented proper regrowth. Marcus had read the reports about the Kytherian refugees. This child, whose name was Zira according to the files, had lost her leg during the escape from her homeworld when their transport ship was attacked by faction extremists. The same energy blast that took her limb had killed her parents, leaving her in the care of distant relatives who barely knew her. The psychological trauma combined with her physical disability had made her adjustment to colony life particularly difficult. Emma's laughter drew Marcus's attention back to the play area. She was currently engaged in an elaborate game that seemed to involve elements from several different cultural traditions. The Zephyrian children were using their natural flight abilities to place glowing orbs in high locations, while the Valkyrie younglings used their climbing skills to retrieve them. The Thornish child contributed by creating musical tones that seemed to guide the game's rhythm, while Emma and the other human children provided enthusiastic commentary and cheering. It was beautiful to watch, the spontaneous creation of something entirely new from the mixing of different traditions. This was what the colony was supposed to represent, a new way forward for all their species, learning from each other and creating something greater than the sum of their parts. But Zira remained on her bench, watching but not participating. Marcus made a decision. As a xenobiologist, he understood the cultural barriers that kept species apart. But, as a father, he recognized a lonely child when he saw one. He walked over to where Zira sat, moving slowly so as not to startle her. Kytherians had enhanced senses and could be easily overwhelmed by sudden movements or loud sounds. "Hello, Zira," he said softly, using the few words of Kytherian he had learned. The universal translator would handle most of the conversation, but using someone's native language for greetings was considered polite. The young alien looked up at him with large, violet eyes that seemed older than her apparent age. Her natural markings were darker than most Kytherians he had seen, indicating she came from one of the warrior clans that had been heavily involved in the recent conflicts. "Dr. Chen," she replied in accented but clear Standard Galactic. "You are Emma's father." "That's right. I've noticed you sitting here for the past few days. The games look fun. The children have created something quite remarkable." Zira's gaze returned to the playground. "It does look enjoyable. But I cannot participate." Marcus sat down on the bench beside her, being careful to maintain the respectful distance that Kytherian culture required. "Because of your leg?" Her markings darkened slightly, which he knew indicated embarrassment or shame. "Among my people, one who is incomplete cannot join in activities that require full physical ability. It would bring dishonor to the group and remind others of failure and loss." "I see. That must be difficult. It is the way of things." Her voice carried a resignation that seemed far too mature for someone so young. "My relatives have explained that I must accept my limitations and find ways to be useful without drawing attention to my condition. Perhaps when I am older, I can assist with data processing or archival work." Marcus felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, not at Zira or even at her people, but at the circumstances that had led to this moment. He had seen too many young beings limit themselves because of what others told them they could or couldn't do. As a scientist, he believed in testing hypotheses rather than accepting assumptions. "Zira, may I ask you something? When you look at those children playing, what do you see?" She tilted her head, a gesture that was universal across many species when considering a question. "I see young beings enjoying themselves. They have created a game that uses each species' natural abilities. It is elegant in its complexity. And, do you see any rules posted? Any official guidelines about who can or cannot participate?" "No, but, then, the only limitations that exist are the ones we create ourselves." Marcus stood up and extended his hand to her. "Would you like to meet my daughter and her friends? I think you might be surprised by what they have to say about participation and rules." Zira stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. In human culture, the gesture was an invitation and a sign of respect. In Kytherian tradition, physical contact between non-family members was rare and significant. To accept would be to trust not just Marcus, but to trust that the human way of doing things might offer something her own culture could not. "Dr. Chen, what if they reject me? What if my presence ruins their game?" Marcus smiled. "Then, we'll deal with that if it happens. But I have a feeling you're underestimating both yourself and them. These children have been creating new traditions every day. Maybe it's time to create another one." After another moment of hesitation, Zira reached out and took his hand. Her grip was stronger than he had expected, and he could feel the slight tremor that indicated both nervousness and excitement. As they approached the play area, Emma noticed them coming and broke away from the group. She bounded over with the unlimited energy that seemed to be a universal trait among young beings. "Dad! Are you going to play with us? We invented a new game that's like Capture the Flag meets three-dimensional chess meets musical chairs, but with flying and climbing and singing." Her words tumbled over each other in enthusiasm. "Actually, I wanted you to meet someone. Emma, this is Zira. Zira, this is my daughter Emma." Emma's eyes widened as she took in Zira's appearance. Marcus held his breath, hoping his faith in his daughter's openness would prove justified. "Hi Zira. I've seen you watching us play. Do you want to join in? We could really use someone who..." Emma stopped mid-sentence as she noticed Zira's missing leg. For a moment, Marcus worried that this would create the very barrier they were trying to overcome. Then, Emma's face lit up with an expression Marcus knew well. It was the same look she got when she was working through a particularly interesting problem. "Oh wow, that's so cool. I bet you have amazing balance on your other leg. And, you could probably help us figure out the strategy parts of our games since you've been watching and analyzing them. Plus, if you can't run around as much, you could be like a coordinator or something. We've been needing someone to help keep track of all the rules we keep making up. Zira blinked in surprise. You would want me to participate even though I cannot run or climb like the others? Are you kidding? Look at our group. Emma gestured toward the other children. Kex can't fly like the Zephyrians, but he's the best at the puzzle parts. Shimmer can't make sounds like Thorn can, but her color patterns help us communicate across long distances. Nobody can do everything, but everyone can do something. That's what makes it fun. As if summoned by Emma's explanation, several of the other children began gathering around. Marcus watched with fascination as this impromptu diplomatic session unfolded. A young Zephyrian named Ariel fluttered her crystalline wings and spoke in the melodic tones of her species. The universal translator rendered her words, "We have been hoping someone would join us who could help with the strategic elements. Our games have become quite complex, and we need someone with analytical abilities to help us refine the rules." Kex, the Valkyrie child, extended his long limbs in a gesture of welcome. "My people value wisdom over physical ability. From watching you observe our activities, I believe you possess considerable analytical intelligence." Even Thorn, the spiky thornish child whose species was known for their direct communication style, added his support. "Efficiency improves with specialized roles. Your perspective as an observer would enhance our collective performance." Zira looked around at the group of diverse beings, each offering acceptance and inclusion in their own cultural way. Marcus could see the conflict in her expression, a lifetime of cultural conditioning warring with the simple, genuine welcome she was receiving. I do not know your games. And my people's traditions regarding." She gestured toward her leg. "Traditions are just things people did before," Emma said matter-of-factly. "We're making new traditions. Want to help?" The simplicity of the statement seemed to cut through Zira's uncertainty. Marcus watched as something shifted in the young Kytherian's posture. Her markings began to lighten, and, for the first time since he had observed her, she seemed to truly consider the possibility of participation rather than just observation. "What would I need to do?" she asked quietly. "First, you need to help us figure out what we're calling this game," Emma said, already moving into planning mode. "We've been calling it multi-species madness, but that doesn't really capture the strategic elements. Also," added Ariel, "we need someone to help us establish consistent rules. We keep changing things in the middle of games, which creates confusion. And we need a way to make sure everyone's abilities are utilized effectively," Kex contributed. "Sometimes our natural instincts work against optimal team composition." Zira listened to each suggestion, and Marcus could practically see her analytical mind engaging with the challenges they presented. "These are complex organizational problems. Have you considered implementing a rotating leadership structure with specialized advisory roles?" The children looked at each other with expressions that clearly said, "Why didn't we think of that?" "That's brilliant!" Emma exclaimed. "So different people could be in charge of different aspects depending on what kind of game we're playing?" "Precisely. And you could establish core principles that remain consistent while allowing for adaptive strategies based on environmental conditions and participant composition." "I have no idea what that means, but it sounds awesome," Emma said. "Want to help us try it?" For the first time since Marcus had been observing her, Zira smiled. It transformed her entire face, making her look like the child she actually was rather than the serious, withdrawn figure she had appeared to be. "Yes," she said. "I would like that very much." As the group began excitedly discussing how to implement Zira's suggestions, Marcus stepped back to give them space. He watched as his daughter and her friends naturally included Zira in their planning, asking for her input and genuinely listening to her responses. What struck him most was how effortlessly they had dismantled the barriers that adult cultures had created. They didn't see a disabled Kytherian who couldn't participate fully, they saw a strategic thinker who could contribute in ways they hadn't considered. They didn't focus on what she couldn't do, they were excited about what she could do. This, Marcus thought, was why the integration colony mattered. Not because it would solve all the political tensions between species, but because it was creating a generation that might think differently about what it meant to be part of a community. Over the next hour, he watched as Zira helped the children develop what they decided to call adaptive cooperative strategy gaming, a framework that could accommodate virtually any combination of abilities and species. Her analytical mind proved invaluable in creating rules that were both flexible and fair, and her observational skills allowed her to spot potential problems before they arose. More importantly, Marcus could see how much she was enjoying herself. Her markings had returned to their normal lighter shade, and she was actively participating in the enthusiastic debates about game mechanics and strategic possibilities. When the play session finally ended, Zira approached Marcus with a serious expression. "Dr. Chen, thank you for encouraging me to join them. I had not realized that participation could take many forms. Thank you for giving them a chance. And for giving yourself one. I must ask, how did you know that they would accept me? Your daughter and her friends, they do not think like most adults I have encountered." Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think children, regardless of species, haven't yet learned all the reasons why things supposedly can't work. They're still willing to try new approaches and see what happens. Sometimes adults mistake that for naivety, but I think it might actually be a form of wisdom." Zira nodded thoughtfully. "My relatives will be surprised by today's events. They may not understand. Change often takes time for adults to accept. But you've proven something important today to yourself and to everyone watching. That has value regardless of what others think." As they prepared to leave, Emma bounded over to them, still buzzing with excitement from the successful gaming session. "Zira, can you come back tomorrow? We want to try implementing the rotating leadership system, and we're going to need someone to help us figure out how to track the different roles and make sure everything stays fair." "I would be honored to participate," Zira replied, and Marcus could hear the genuine happiness in her voice. As they walked toward the exit of the recreation dome, Marcus reflected on what he had witnessed. The integration colony was succeeding in ways that the original planners had never anticipated. Yes, they were creating political and economic partnerships between species, but, more importantly, they were creating new cultural possibilities. The children weren't just learning about other species, they were creating new ways of being together that transcended the limitations of their individual cultures. They were proving that inclusion wasn't just about tolerance or accommodation, it was about recognizing that diversity of ability, perspective, and experience made everything they did more interesting and more effective. Marcus knew that Zira still faced challenges. Her relatives might not immediately understand or approve of her new activities. Some adult Kytherians might view her participation as inappropriate or even shameful. But she had proven to herself that she could contribute meaningfully to a group, and that knowledge would stay with her regardless of external opposition. As they reached the transport station, Zira turned to Marcus one more time. "Dr. Chen, may I ask you one more question?" "Of course. When you approached me today, were you certain that this would work out as it did?" Marcus smiled. "No, I wasn't certain at all. But sometimes the most important things we do require a leap of faith. Today, you took that leap, and look what you found." Zira's markings brightened in what Marcus had learned was the Kytherian expression of deep satisfaction. "Yes. I found friends who see possibilities instead of limitations." As Marcus watched her board the transport that would take her back to the Kytherian residential section, he felt a familiar sense of pride not just in his daughter and her friends, but in the remarkable thing they were all building together on this distant world. They were proving that the future didn't have to be limited by the assumptions of the past, and that sometimes the most profound changes began with a simple question: "Can I join you?" 3 weeks had passed since Zira's first day playing with Emma and her multi-species group. What had started as a simple inclusion had evolved into something far more significant. The children's games had become increasingly sophisticated, drawing the attention of adult observers from across the colony. More importantly, word had begun to spread throughout the Kytherian community about the young refugee who had found acceptance among the human settlers and their alien friends. Dr. Marcus Chen had been monitoring the situation carefully, both as a xenobiologist interested in interspecies social dynamics and as a father concerned for his daughter's well-being. The positive changes in Zira were undeniable. She walked with more confidence, spoke up more frequently, and had even begun suggesting modifications to the colony's recreational facilities that would make them more accessible to beings with different physical capabilities. But Marcus had also become aware of growing tension within the Kytherian refugee community. Not everyone appreciated Zira's newfound integration with non-Kytherian children, and some viewed her participation in human-led activities as a betrayal of their cultural values. This morning, as Marcus arrived at the recreation dome for another session, he immediately sensed that something was different. The usual sounds of children at play were subdued, and he could see Emma and her friends clustered in a tight group near their usual playing area. Their body language suggested they were discussing something serious. Zira was nowhere to be seen. Marcus approached the group, noting the concerned expressions on their young faces. Even Thorn, whose thornish features were naturally stern, seemed more troubled than usual. "Dad," Emma said as she noticed him approaching, "Zira isn't here today. And yesterday, she seemed really upset about something, but she wouldn't tell us what was wrong." Ariel fluttered her crystalline wings in agitation. She mentioned that some adult Kytherians had been asking her questions about our activities. She seemed frightened. Kex stretched his elongated limbs in the Valkyrie gesture that indicated deep concern. "Among my people, when adults show excessive interest in children's social activities, it often precedes attempts to impose restrictions." Marcus felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. He had hoped that Zira's successful integration would serve as a positive example for other Kytherian refugees, but he was beginning to suspect that the opposite had occurred. "Have any of you tried to contact her?" he asked. "We sent messages through the colony communication system," Emma replied, "but she hasn't responded." "That's not like her. She always gets back to us really quickly because she says our strategic planning requires consistent communication." Shimmer, the young chromatic singer, rippled through a pattern of concerned blues and purples as she spoke. "Yesterday, she told us that some of her relatives were angry about her abandonment of Kytherian ways and that they were considering requesting a transfer to a different colony where she could receive proper cultural guidance." The knot in Marcus's stomach tightened. He knew that refugee communities often struggled with questions of cultural preservation versus integration, but he hadn't anticipated that Zira's participation in interspecies activities would create this level of controversy. "Dad," Emma said, looking up at him with determined eyes, "we have to do something. Zira is part of our group now. We can't just let her be taken away because some adults don't understand what we're doing." Marcus looked around at the diverse group of young beings, each representing their species' future generation, all united in their concern for their friend. It struck him that these children had accomplished something that adult diplomatic corps had been struggling with for decades. They had created genuine interspecies bonds based on mutual respect and shared purpose. "You're right," he said. "But this is a delicate situation. The Kytherian community has been through tremendous trauma, and their leaders are trying to preserve their cultural identity in an unfamiliar environment. We need to approach this carefully." "But they're wrong about Zira," Emma insisted. "She hasn't abandoned Kytherian culture, she shared it with us. She taught us about the meditation techniques her people use for strategic thinking. She showed us the patterns in her markings and explained what they mean. She's made us all more interested in learning about Kytherian history and traditions." Kex nodded vigorously. "Indeed. Through Zira's participation, we have all gained appreciation for Kytherian analytical methods. Her cultural contributions have enriched our activities rather than diminished them. And she's helped us understand that different doesn't mean worse," added Ariel. "Before I met Zira, I thought the way Kytherians process information was too slow. But she's shown us that taking time to analyze can prevent mistakes and create better outcomes." Marcus felt a surge of pride in these remarkable children. Without realizing it, they had articulated one of the fundamental principles of successful cultural integration, the idea that sharing one's heritage could strengthen rather than weaken cultural identity. "Those are excellent points," he said. "But the question is, how do we communicate that to the Kytherian leadership in a way they'll understand and accept?" Shimmer's color patterns shifted to thoughtful greens and golds. In my culture, we have mediators who help resolve conflicts between different chromatic groups. Could we request mediation? The colony does have interspecies mediation services, Marcus acknowledged. But, those typically deal with resource allocation or territorial disputes, not cultural integration issues. Then, maybe we need to create a new approach, Emma said. Zira taught us that when existing systems don't work for new situations, you have to develop adaptive solutions. Thorn made the harmonic sound that indicated agreement in Thornish culture. Logical. Current mediation protocols are insufficient for this type of cultural conflict. New parameters required. As Marcus listened to the children brainstorm solutions, an idea began to form in his mind. These young beings had created something unprecedented, a successful model of interspecies cooperation that transcended traditional cultural barriers. What if, instead of trying to defend Zira's participation in their activities, they demonstrated the value of their approach to the broader community? I have a suggestion, he said. What if we organized a presentation for the adult community, not just Kytherians, but representatives from all the species here? You could show what you've accomplished together and explain how each culture has contributed to your success. The children exchanged glances, a silent communication that Marcus had observed developing between them over weeks of collaboration. That's actually brilliant, Emma said. We could show them that we're not abandoning our cultures, we're making them stronger by sharing them. But, would the adults listen to us? Ariel asked. Many older beings consider our activities to be merely play without serious significance. Then, we need to show them the significance, Kex replied. Our games have evolved into complex organizational systems that could have applications beyond recreational activities. Marcus felt his excitement growing. Actually, that's not wrong. What you've developed here, adaptive cooperative frameworks that accommodate diverse abilities and perspectives, that has potential applications for workplace teams, research groups, even diplomatic negotiations. Really? Shimmer's patterns brightened with interest. Absolutely. You've solved problems that adult organizations struggle with all the time: how to include everyone meaningfully, how to utilize different strengths effectively, how to maintain fairness while adapting to changing circumstances. Thorn's harmonic tone shifted to what Marcus recognized as excitement. Then, our activities have practical value beyond entertainment. This could be demonstrated to adult community leaders. But, first, Emma said, we need to talk to Zira. She should be part of planning this, and we need to make sure she's okay. Marcus nodded. I'll reach out to the Kytherian community liaison and request a meeting. As a colony official, I should be able to arrange something appropriate. That afternoon, Marcus found himself in the sterile conference room of the administrative complex, facing Elder Vrex, the senior Kytherian representative on the colony council. Elder Vrex was an imposing figure even by Kytherian standards, with intricate dark markings that indicated his high clan status and deep-set violet eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of their surroundings. Dr. Chen, Elder Vrex began in formal standard galactic. I assume this meeting concerns the youngling Zira and her inappropriate associations. Marcus chose his words carefully. I'm concerned about Zira's well-being. She's been an important part of a very successful interspecies youth program, and her sudden absence has affected the entire group. The youngling has been removed from those activities for her own good. She was becoming too influenced by foreign ways of thinking, forgetting the traditions and values of her people. Elder Vrex's markings darkened slightly. We appreciate human hospitality, but we cannot allow our young to lose their cultural identity. With respect, Elder Vrex, I don't think Zira was losing her cultural identity. From what I observed, she was sharing it with others while learning about their cultures as well. Isn't that different from losing it? You do not understand Kytherian ways, Dr. Chen. Our people have survived millennia of conflicts because we have maintained our cultural purity and traditional values. This integration experiment may work for humans, but it is not appropriate for us. Marcus felt his frustration rising but forced himself to remain calm. What if I could show you that Zira's participation actually strengthened Kytherian cultural representation rather than weakening it? Would you be willing to observe a demonstration? Elder Vrex's eyes narrowed. What kind of demonstration? The children have developed something remarkable, a system for cooperative problem solving that incorporates elements from all their cultures. Zira has been instrumental in its development, contributing Kytherian analytical methods that have enhanced the effectiveness of the entire group. You speak of children's games as though they have significance beyond amusement. Because they do. What these children have created could revolutionize how multi-species teams function throughout the galaxy. And Kytherian approaches to strategic analysis have been central to their success. For the first time in the conversation, Elder Vrex seemed genuinely surprised. You believe their activities have practical applications? I'm certain of it. And I think if you observed their methods, you'd see that Zira hasn't abandoned Kytherian values, she's found new ways to apply them. Elder Vrex was quiet for several moments, his markings shifting through subtle color changes that Marcus couldn't fully interpret. Finally, he spoke. I will consider your proposal. But I must insist that any demonstration be conducted under proper supervision, and if I determine that the activities are indeed harmful to Kytherian cultural integrity, the youngling will be permanently separated from these influences. That's fair, Marcus replied, though he felt the weight of the stakes involved. When would be convenient for this observation? Tomorrow afternoon. I will bring other Kytherian adults as witnesses. If this demonstration fails to prove your claims, Dr. Chen, you will agree not to interfere further in our community's decisions regarding our youth. As Marcus left the meeting, he felt both hope and apprehension. The children had created something genuinely remarkable, but would it be enough to overcome centuries of cultural conditioning? And could they demonstrate their achievements under the pressure of adult scrutiny and potential judgment? That evening, Marcus gathered Emma and her friends to explain the situation. They listened intently as he described the meeting with Elder Vrex and the conditions for the demonstration. So basically, Emma said when he finished, if we can't prove that what we do here is important and that Zira hasn't lost her Kytherian identity, they're going to take her away permanently? That's essentially correct, Marcus admitted. The children exchanged those silent glances again, and Marcus could see them processing the implications. Then, we better make sure our demonstration is perfect, Ariel said, her wings shimmering with determination. But we can't do it without Zira, Kex pointed out. She needs to be part of showing them what we've accomplished together. And she needs to know that we support her, Shimmer added, her patterns cycling through determined oranges and reds. Thorn created a complex harmonic sequence that the universal translator rendered as, optimal outcome requires full team participation. Zira's involvement essential for accurate demonstration of our capabilities. Marcus looked around at their young faces, seeing a level of resolve and strategic thinking that impressed him deeply. So what do you propose? Emma's expression took on the focused look that Marcus associated with her most creative problem-solving moments. We need to contact Zira directly and let her know what's happening. Then, we need to plan a demonstration that shows exactly how Kytherian analytical methods have made everything we do better. But, will she be allowed to participate? Ariel asked. We have to make sure she is, Emma replied. Because this isn't just about proving our games are valuable, it's about proving that she belongs with us and that being with us makes her more Kytherian, not less. Marcus felt a surge of admiration for his daughter and her friends. They understood that this demonstration was about more than just preserving their playgroup, it was about defending the right of young beings to form relationships across cultural boundaries and about proving that diversity could strengthen rather than threaten cultural identity. All right, he said. Let's figure out how to make this work. As they began planning their approach, Marcus realized that tomorrow's demonstration would be about more than just children's games. It would be a test of whether the colony's vision of peaceful integration could survive contact with the real fears and concerns of refugee communities trying to preserve their cultural heritage in an uncertain galaxy. The children had already proven that such integration was possible. Now they had to prove that it was valuable not just for humans, but for everyone involved. And, in doing so, they might just save their friend and validate the most important experiment humanity had ever undertaken in interspecies relations. The morning of the demonstration dawned clear and bright across the colony's artificial sky. Marcus had barely slept, his mind racing through all the variables that could affect the outcome of today's presentation. He knew that the children were equally nervous. Emma had been up late the night before, refining their presentation materials and double-checking every aspect of their plan. The most challenging part had been reaching Zira. The Kytherian community had restricted her access to outside communication, but Kex had suggested using the colony's official educational channels. As the child of a diplomatic family, he had access to formal inter-community messaging systems that couldn't be easily blocked. The message they had finally managed to send was brief but clear: tomorrow afternoon, Recreation Dome, official demonstration. Your presence requested by Elder Vrex for cultural evaluation purposes. We need you there, not just for us, but to show them who you really are. Marcus had no way of knowing if Zira had received the message or if she would be permitted to attend. The uncertainty was eating at all of them. As they arrived at the Recreation Dome, Marcus was surprised to see how many adult observers had gathered. Word of the demonstration had apparently spread beyond just the Kytherian community. He spotted representatives from the Valkyrie Diplomatic Corps, several Zephyrian cultural advisors, members of the Thornish Technical Council, and even a delegation of chromatic singer harmony specialists. Elder Vrex stood at the center of the Kytherian group, his imposing presence making his disapproval clear even before the demonstration began. Beside him were several other Kytherian adults, including one whom Marcus recognized as Zira's guardian relative, a stern-looking individual whose markings indicated membership in one of the more conservative clan factions. The children had arrived early and were setting up their demonstration area with methodical precision. Marcus watched with growing pride as they transformed the usual chaotic playground into an organized presentation space that showcased the sophisticated nature of their activities. Emma was serving as the primary coordinator, but Marcus could see how naturally she deferred to her friends' expertise in their respective areas. Ariel was arranging the three-dimensional components that would demonstrate their spatial strategy elements. Kex was calibrating the sensor devices they used for their more complex games. Thorn was testing the harmonic communication systems. Shimmer was preparing the visual display matrices that would show their organizational patterns. But Zira was still nowhere to be seen. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, Marcus announced as the appointed time arrived, thank you for coming to observe what these remarkable young individuals have developed over the past several weeks. I'll let them explain their work in their own words. Emma stepped forward, and Marcus could see her taking a deep breath to calm her nerves. Honored adults and cultural representatives, we want to show you something we've created together. We call it adaptive cooperative strategy gaming, but it's really much more than games. She gestured to her diverse group of friends. Each of us comes from a different species with different abilities and different ways of thinking. At first, we tried to play separately or to change ourselves to fit into each other's games. But that didn't work very well. Someone was always left out or frustrated. Kex took over the presentation, his formal Valkyrie diplomatic training showing in his precise delivery. We discovered that optimal results occurred when we designed activities that utilized each species' natural strengths rather than requiring conformity to a single approach. But the breakthrough came, Ariel added, her musical voice carrying clearly across the dome, when we realized that our differences weren't obstacles to overcome, they were resources to utilize. Thorn created a harmonic sequence that translated to diversity of capability produces superior outcomes when properly organized. Shimmer's patterns shifted to illustrative colors as she continued, each culture contributed essential elements. Zephyrian spatial awareness, Valkyrie systematic analysis, Thornish precision communication, chromatic singer pattern recognition, and human creative synthesis. Marcus noticed that they hadn't yet mentioned Kytherian contributions, and he suspected this was deliberate. They were building up to something. But we were still missing a crucial component, Emma said, and Marcus could hear the emotion in her voice. We needed someone who could help us understand how all these different approaches could work together strategically. At that moment, the dome's entrance opened, and Zira entered with Elder Vrex's assistant. Marcus felt a surge of relief that was immediately followed by concern. Zira looked nervous and uncertain, very different from the confident young strategist who had become such an integral part of their group. Zira! Emma called out, breaking from her formal presentation tone. You made it! The spontaneous joy in Emma's voice seemed to cut through some of Zira's uncertainty. Her markings lightened slightly, and she managed a small smile as she approached the group. Elder Vrex spoke for the first time since arriving. The youngling is here for observation purposes only. She will not participate in activities that might further compromise her cultural identity. Emma looked directly at Elder Vrex, and Marcus was impressed by her respectful but determined response. Honored Elder, with your permission, we'd like to show you exactly how Zira's Kytherian identity has made our entire group more effective. She turned to Zira. Would you be willing to explain to the adults what you taught us about strategic analysis? Zira glanced nervously at Elder Vrex, who gave a slight nod of permission. I shared some of the analytical methods that Kytherian younglings learn for evaluating complex situations, Zira said quietly. Traditional approaches for understanding how multiple variables interact with each other. Show them, Kex encouraged. Demonstrate the pattern mapping technique. With growing confidence, Zira moved to the central display area. Kytherian strategy analysis begins with identifying all relevant factors in a situation, then, mapping the relationships between them to predict potential outcomes. She began arranging the various game components in complex patterns, her movements becoming more fluid and assured as she fell into the familiar rhythms of explanation. For example, in our cooperative activities, we must consider each participant's physical capabilities, cognitive strengths, cultural preferences, and emotional state. Then, we map how these factors interact to create optimal team compositions. Marcus could see the adult observers leaning forward with interest as Zira continued her demonstration. Her analytical approach was indeed sophisticated, showing a level of strategic thinking that was impressive even by adult standards. But, the crucial insight, Zira continued, her confidence growing, is that optimal solutions require balancing individual strengths with group objectives. Traditional Kytherian analysis teaches us to find the arrangement that maximizes positive interactions while minimizing conflicts. Elder Vrex's expression had shifted from skeptical to thoughtful. These are indeed classical Kytherian strategic principles. But, how do they apply to recreational activities? Zira's markings brightened as she warmed to her subject. The applications are extensive, honored Elder. Watch. She gestured to her friends, who began moving into formation with practiced ease. Emma's human adaptability allows for rapid strategy modification. Ariel's Zephyrian spatial awareness provides three-dimensional tactical options. Kex's Valkyrie systematic approach ensures logical progression. Thorn's Thornish precision maintains communication accuracy. Shimmer's chromatic singer pattern recognition identifies optimal sequences. As she spoke, the children began demonstrating one of their more complex cooperative challenges. Marcus watched the adult observers' faces as they realized that what they were seeing was far more sophisticated than simple play. Each individual contributes their cultural strengths, Zira continued, now fully engaged in her teacher role, but the Kytherian analytical framework allows us to integrate these contributions into coherent strategic approaches. The demonstration that followed was remarkable. The children worked through a multi-layered problem that required spatial reasoning, logical analysis, creative thinking, precise communication, and pattern recognition. But, more than just showcasing their individual abilities, they showed how Zira's strategic framework allowed them to coordinate their efforts in ways that produced outcomes none of them could achieve alone. You see, Zira said as they completed the demonstration, I haven't abandoned Kytherian ways of thinking. I've found new applications for them. These friends have taught me that our analytical methods can work with other approaches instead of only alongside them. Elder Vrex was quiet for several long moments, his markings cycling through colors that Marcus couldn't interpret. Finally, he spoke. Young Zira, your application of traditional analysis is sophisticated. But, do you not feel that constant exposure to foreign methods of thinking dilutes the purity of Kytherian approaches? Zira considered the question carefully before responding. Honored Elder, I have learned more about Kytherian analytical methods in the past 3 weeks than in the previous 3 years. When I have to explain our approaches to friends from other cultures, I understand them more deeply. When I see how our methods solve problems that other approaches cannot, I appreciate their value more fully. She gestured to the complex patterns still arranged in the demonstration area. Before joining this group, I knew that Kytherians were good at strategic analysis. Now I understand exactly why our methods are valuable and how they complement other approaches. I feel more Kytherian than I ever have before. Ariel fluttered forward to support her friend. Zira has taught all of us to appreciate the depth and sophistication of Kytherian thinking. Through her, we've learned to value systematic analysis and long-term strategic planning. Indeed, Kex added, my own people's diplomatic methods have been enhanced by incorporating Kytherian analytical frameworks. Emma stepped forward with a determined expression. Honored Elder, Zira hasn't lost her culture by being with us. She's helped us understand what makes Kytherian culture special. And, in doing that, she's learned what makes it special too. The Valkyrie diplomatic representative spoke for the first time. Elder Vrex, if I may observe, what these younglings have accomplished represents a significant advancement in interspecies cooperation methodology. The Kytherian analytical contributions appear to be essential to their success. A Zephyrian cultural advisor added her voice. Our specialists have been struggling with similar integration challenges for decades. These children seem to have developed solutions that have eluded adult researchers. Elder Vrex looked around at the assembled adult observers, many of whom were nodding in agreement. Marcus could see the conflict in his expression. The evidence before him clearly contradicted his preconceptions about cultural integration. Dr. Chen, Elder Vrex said finally, you claimed that this demonstration would show practical applications. What exactly are you suggesting? Marcus had been waiting for this moment. Honored Elder, what these children have developed could revolutionize how multi-species teams function throughout the galaxy. Diplomatic corps, research teams, trade negotiations, even military operations, any situation where diverse beings need to work together effectively. And, the Kytherian analytical methods would be central to implementing these approaches, added the Valkyrie representative. Your people could become the premier strategic consultants for interspecies cooperation initiatives. Marcus could see Elder Vrex processing this information, his markings cycling through thoughtful patterns. You're suggesting that preserving our cultural methods doesn't require isolation from other cultures, Elder Vrex said slowly. I'm suggesting, Marcus replied, that sharing your cultural methods with others might be the best way to ensure they're preserved and valued. These children have proven that cultural exchange can strengthen identity rather than weaken it. Zira stepped forward, her posture straight and confident. Honored Elder, I request permission to continue participating in these activities. Not as someone abandoning Kytherian ways, but as someone applying them in new contexts. And, I request, Emma added, that we be allowed to continue learning from each other. Zira makes all of us better, and we help her understand her own strengths. Elder Vrex looked around at the mixed group of children and adults, all waiting for his decision. Marcus held his breath, knowing that this moment would determine not just Zira's future but, potentially the future of cultural integration throughout the colony. Young Zira, Elder Vrex said finally, your analysis of strategic cooperation is indeed sophisticated. And, your explanation of Kytherian methods shows deep understanding of our cultural values. He paused, his markings shifting to patterns that Marcus hoped indicated acceptance rather than rejection. I will permit your continued participation in these activities, with conditions. You will meet weekly with Kytherian cultural advisors to ensure your understanding of our traditions remains strong. You will teach other Kytherian younglings about the analytical methods you have developed. And, you will serve as a cultural ambassador, helping other species understand the value of Kytherian approaches. Zira's markings brightened to colors Marcus had never seen from her before, pure joy and relief mixed with determination. I accept all conditions gladly, Honored Elder. Thank you for this opportunity. As the adult observers began discussing the implications of what they had witnessed, Marcus watched Emma and her friends surround Zira in celebration. They had done more than save their friend, they had proven that the future could be built on cooperation rather than separation, on understanding rather than fear. The integration colony was succeeding in ways its founders had never imagined, one friendship at a time. 6 months had passed since the demonstration that changed everything. The recreation dome had been transformed from a simple playground into what the colony administration now called the Interspecies Cooperation Research Facility. What Emma and her friends had created as children's games had evolved into a formal program studied by xenosociologists, diplomatic researchers, and cultural integration specialists from across the galaxy. Dr. Marcus Chen stood in his new office overlooking the facility, watching the latest group of participants work through one of the cooperative challenges. The program had expanded far beyond the original group of children. Young beings from 12 different species now participated regularly, and adult observers came from universities and government institutions throughout known space to study their methods. But the most significant change was in Zira herself. The nervous, isolated refugee who had once sat alone on a bench was now the facility's youngest certified instructor. Her analytical frameworks had been adopted by 3 major diplomatic institutions, and her papers on multiculturally integrated strategic analysis were required reading in xenosociology programs across the galaxy. More importantly, she had become a bridge between the Kytherian refugee community and the broader colony population. Her success had opened doors for other Kytherian young people to participate in integration activities, and her work with cultural preservation techniques had helped ease the fears of conservative community leaders. Dr. Chen? The voice belonged to Commander Sarah Torres, the colony's new director of interspecies relations. She had arrived 3 months ago specifically to oversee the expansion of the cooperation program. The morning briefing is ready. Marcus turned from the window. How are our new arrivals adjusting? Better than expected. The Alto-Iran delegation is particularly impressed with the analytical frameworks. They're discussing implementing similar programs on their homeworld. As they walked toward the conference room, Marcus reflected on how dramatically everything had changed. What had started as a simple act of inclusion, a father encouraging a lonely child to join his daughter's playgroup, had become a model for interspecies cooperation that was being studied and replicated throughout the galaxy. The morning briefing room buzzed with activity. Representatives from multiple species reviewed data streams, analyzed participation patterns, and discussed modifications to existing protocols. At the center of it all, Zira worked with a diverse team of adult researchers, her quick analysis and strategic insights making her an invaluable contributor despite her young age. Zira, Commander Torres called, "Could you update us on the new participant integration protocols?" Zira looked up from the holographic display she was manipulating, her markings bright with concentration. "Certainly, Commander. We've identified 3 key factors that predict successful integration for new participants." She gestured to the data visualization floating above the conference table. First, preliminary cultural education for all participants about newcomers' traditions and values. This prevents misunderstandings and builds appreciation for diverse approaches. Marcus watched as the adult researchers leaned forward, taking notes on insights developed by someone who would have been considered a child by most of their cultures. Second, Zira continued, graduated challenge introduction. New participants need time to understand the cooperative frameworks before engaging in complex activities. We've developed a 3-phase progression that allows for adaptation while building confidence. A Valkyrie cultural advisor raised her elongated arm. What about participants who initially resist cooperation due to cultural conditioning? Zira's expression grew thoughtful. That was actually the most challenging problem to solve. We found that direct persuasion rarely works. Instead, we use peer mentoring with culturally compatible intermediaries. When new participants see successful cooperation from beings they consider culturally similar, resistance decreases significantly. Commander Torres nodded approvingly. And the third factor? Meaningful contribution opportunities, Zira replied. Every participant must have chances to contribute their unique cultural strengths to group success. When individuals feel that their heritage adds value rather than creating obstacles, integration accelerates. As the briefing continued, Marcus marveled at the sophistication of the insights being discussed. These weren't just observations about children playing games, they were fundamental principles of successful multicultural integration that had applications across every aspect of galactic civilization. After the briefing, Marcus found himself walking with Zira toward the main activity area. Emma and the rest of the original group were there, now serving as senior peer mentors for newer participants. The sight of his daughter confidently guiding younglings from species he had never encountered filled Marcus with pride. "Zira," he said as they walked, "do you ever think about that first day when you asked if you could join their games?" Her markings shifted to warm, thoughtful colors. "Every day, Dr. Chan. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't encouraged me to approach them. What do you think would have happened? I would probably still be sitting on that bench, watching others participate in activities I thought I could never be part of." She paused, her expression growing serious. But, more than that, all of this, she gestured toward the bustling facility around them, would never have existed. Marcus considered her words. "You really think one conversation made that much difference?" "I think," Zira replied carefully, "that most significant changes begin with someone being willing to take a small risk for someone else. Your willingness to reach out to an isolated alien child started a chain of events that no one could have predicted." As they reached the activity area, they were greeted by Emma and the rest of the original group, now calling themselves the Founding Cooperative in recognition of their role in developing the program's core principles. "Dad! Zira!" Emma called out. "Come see what the new Crystalline Harmony younglings figured out." The Crystalline Harmony species was one of the newest additions to the colony, refugees from a distant solar system that had been consumed by stellar collapse. They were mineral-based beings whose thought processes operated on much slower timescales than most biological species, making integration particularly challenging. But, as Marcus watched, he saw the three young Crystalline Harmony participants working seamlessly with biological younglings in solving a complex spatial puzzle. Their slower processing speed, which had initially seemed like a disadvantage, allowed them to spot long-term pattern implications that faster thinkers missed. "They're amazing," Emma explained excitedly. "They see connections that take the rest of us hours to figure out." Zira developed a communication protocol that lets them share their insights in real time instead of waiting for their full analysis cycles. Ariel fluttered over to join the conversation. "And their geological knowledge has opened up entirely new categories of environmental challenges. We're learning to think in geological timescales for some of our strategic planning." Marcus watched Zira's face as she observed the successful integration of these newest participants. Her expression showed deep satisfaction, but also something else, a kind of wonder at how far they had all come. Dr. Chen, one of the Crystalline Harmony younglings, spoke, their voice carrying the distinctive harmonic resonances of their species. "Instructor Zira has taught us that our processing differences are strengths rather than limitations. This concept was unexpected but valuable." Kex, who had grown considerably in the past months and was now preparing for advanced diplomatic training, added his observations. "The integration protocols Zira developed have applications beyond recreational activities. The Valkyrie Diplomatic Corps is implementing modified versions for first contact situations." Thorne created a complex harmonic sequence that translated to systematic cooperation enhancement produces exponential benefits across multiple application domains. Shimmer's patterns sparkled with pride as she spoke, "And the best part is that we keep learning new things. Every new species that joins teaches us something we never knew before." As Marcus listened to these remarkable young beings discuss their work, he realized that they had accomplished something that adult civilizations had been struggling with for millennia. They had proven that diversity was not a challenge to be managed but a resource to be utilized, that cultural differences were not barriers to overcome but strengths to be leveraged. Later that afternoon, Marcus found himself in a private conversation with Zira in his office. She had come to discuss some technical aspects of the program, but their conversation had turned to more personal matters. "Zira, I have to ask, do you ever miss the way things were before? The simpler time when you were just playing games with Emma and her friends?" Zira considered the question with the careful analysis that had become her trademark. "I miss the simplicity sometimes. But I wouldn't trade what we've accomplished for anything. Do you know what the most important thing I've learned is?" "What's that?" "That belonging isn't about being the same as everyone else. It's about being valued for who you are and what you can contribute." Her markings brightened as she continued. "When I was sitting on that bench, I thought I had to choose between being Kytherian and being accepted. You and Emma taught me that I could be more Kytherian by sharing who I am with others. Marcus felt a familiar warmth in his chest. You've taught us all that lesson, Zira. Not just Emma and her friends, but everyone who's been part of this program. Dr. Chen, may I ask you something personal? Of course. When you first approached me that day, did you know that it would lead to all of this? Marcus smiled. Not at all. I just saw a lonely child who reminded me of Emma when she was having trouble making friends at our previous posting. I thought maybe I could help. And, now I think that sometimes the most important things we do are the ones we don't plan. Sometimes caring about one person can change everything. Their conversation was interrupted by Emma bursting into the office with her usual enthusiasm. Dad! Zira! You have to come see this. The new quantum resonance younglings just solved a puzzle that's been stumping the adult researchers for weeks. As they followed Emma back to the activity area, Marcus reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this point. A simple question, "Can I join you?" had become the foundation for a new model of interspecies cooperation that was changing how civilizations throughout the galaxy approached diversity and inclusion. But, more than that, it had proven something fundamental about the nature of progress and positive change. The most significant advances often began not with grand declarations or formal policies, but with individual acts of kindness, with people willing to extend friendship across differences, with the courage to believe that understanding was possible even when it seemed unlikely. As he watched Zira work with the newest group of participants, her confidence and expertise evident in every interaction, Marcus realized that they had all learned the most important lesson of all, that the future was built one friendship at a time, one act of inclusion at a time, one moment of choosing understanding over fear at a time. The integration colony had succeeded beyond its founders' wildest dreams, not because of superior technology or advanced planning, but because a few young beings had decided that differences were interesting rather than threatening, and because one human father had been willing to help a lonely alien child discover that she belonged. 5 years had transformed the colony of Kepler 442b from an experimental settlement into the most studied and celebrated example of successful interspecies integration in galactic history. The Interspecies Cooperation Research Facility had grown into a sprawling complex that hosted beings from over 30 different species, while the original recreation dome had been preserved as a historical monument to the humble beginnings of what scholars now called the GNU Cooperation Movement. Dr. Marcus Chen, now Director of Xenosocial Integration Studies, stood before the Galactic Council's Committee on Interspecies Relations in the Great Chamber on Centauri Prime. The circular amphitheater contained representatives from every known spacefaring civilization, their diverse forms creating a spectacular display of galactic diversity. Today's session would determine whether the Kepler Protocol, the formal framework developed from the children's original games, would be adopted as the standard approach for all new integration colonies. Honored representatives, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustics. 5 years ago, a young Kytherian refugee sat alone on a bench, believing she had no place in our community. Today, that same individual serves as the youngest senior cultural integration specialist in galactic history, and her methodologies have revolutionized how our civilizations work together. In the gallery reserved for special guests, Zira watched the proceedings with quiet intensity. Now 18 by human standards, she had grown into a confident and accomplished young adult whose influence extended far beyond the colony where her journey had begun. Her analytical frameworks were used by diplomatic corps throughout known space, and her research papers on multicultural cooperation had become foundational texts in xenosociology programs across the galaxy. Beside her sat Emma, now 13 and already showing signs of following in her father's footsteps as a xenobiologist. The original group of friends had maintained their close bonds despite the expansion of their activities and the attention their work had received. They had become symbols of a generation that saw diversity as an opportunity rather than a challenge. The Kepler Protocol, Marcus continued, has been successfully implemented in 43 separate colonies, resulting in integration success rates that exceed 95%. More significantly, these communities have shown levels of innovation and problem-solving capability that surpass single-species settlements by factors of 3 to 7. Representative Fexare of the Stellar Confederation, a towering being with crystalline features, spoke first. Director Chen, while the results you present are impressive, many of our member civilizations remain concerned about cultural preservation. How do you address fears that integration inevitably leads to the loss of distinct cultural identities? Marcus had anticipated this question. Honored Representative, I'd like to ask Senior Specialist Zira to address that concern directly. Zira rose from her seat in the gallery, her movements graceful despite the prosthetic leg that had replaced her missing limb 2 years earlier. Advanced Kytherian medical technology had finally developed techniques that could work with the specific type of energy weapon damage she had suffered, but she had chosen to wait until after her work on integration protocols was complete before undergoing the procedure. Honored Representatives, Zira began, her voice carrying the confidence that came from years of speaking to diverse audiences. I stand before you as someone who has lived the question of cultural preservation versus integration. When I first joined the activities that became the Kepler Protocol, my own people feared I was abandoning Kytherian identity. Her markings shifted to the formal patterns of academic discourse as she continued. What I discovered was the opposite. By sharing Kytherian analytical methods with beings from other cultures, I gained a deeper understanding of what makes our approaches unique and valuable. By explaining our traditions to others, I learned aspects of my own heritage that I had never fully appreciated. She gestured to a holographic display that showed cultural preservation metrics from protocol colonies. Our data demonstrates that cultural knowledge retention in integrated communities consistently exceeds that of isolated settlements. When young beings must explain their traditions to friends from other cultures, they engage with their heritage more actively and meaningfully. Representative Veltar of the Hive Collective, whose insectoid form was barely contained by the specialized seating, vibrated with interest. But surely there must be some loss of cultural purity in such environments? Zira's markings brightened with what Marcus recognized as her teaching mode. Representative Veltar, I would challenge the concept of cultural purity itself. Cultures are living systems that grow and adapt through interaction. The Kytherian analytical methods I employ today are more sophisticated and effective than those practiced by our ancestors precisely because they have been tested and refined through contact with other approaches. A new voice entered the discussion, Representative Quindara of the Ethereal Conclave, a being of shifting energies whose words appeared directly in the chamber's translation matrix. Yet there are reports of traditional practices being modified or abandoned in protocol colonies. Yes, Zira agreed readily, just as we have observed in isolated communities. The difference is that in integrated settlements, changes are conscious choices made through understanding multiple options, rather than gradual erosion due to environmental pressures or generational drift. She activated another display showing comparative data. Young beings in protocol colonies show higher levels of cultural knowledge, stronger identification with their heritage traditions, and greater pride in their species' contributions to galactic civilization. They don't abandon their cultures, they become better representatives of them. Marcus watched the representatives' reactions, noting the thoughtful expressions and intense discussions breaking out in various species groups throughout the chamber. Representative Fexare spoke again. Senior Specialist Zira, your personal success is admirable, but can these results be replicated across all species and cultural combinations? Emma rose from her seat in the gallery, and Marcus felt a surge of pride as his daughter requested permission to speak. Honored representatives, Emma began, and Marcus marveled at the confidence in her young voice. I've lived my entire adolescence in an integrated community. I've seen beings from species you've never heard of learn to work together in ways that amazed their own cultural leaders. She looked around the vast chamber. The question isn't whether integration works for all species, we've proven that it does. The question is whether we're brave enough to let our children teach us new ways of being together. Her words created a stir throughout the chamber. Marcus could see representatives leaning forward, engaging in rapid discussions with their advisors. 3 months ago, Emma continued, we welcomed refugees from the Andorian synthesis, beings whose entire culture had been based on the belief that their thought patterns were incompatible with biological minds. They were fleeing their homeworld because they believed no one could understand them. She gestured toward the gallery where a shimmering, geometric form watched the proceedings. Kethval over there is not just participating in our programs, they've become one of our most effective cultural bridge builders. Their synthetic perspective has enhanced everyone's understanding of logic and creativity alike. Marcus felt a familiar sense of awe at how naturally these young beings had transcended barriers that adult civilizations had considered insurmountable. Representative Quindara's energy patterns shifted to curious configurations. Young Emma, are you suggesting that cultural compatibility is not a significant factor in successful integration? I'm suggesting, Emma replied with a slight smile, that compatibility is something you create, not something you discover. When people want to understand each other, they find ways to make it work. The chamber fell silent as representatives processed this simple but profound statement. Elder Vrex of the Kytherian delegation rose to speak. Marcus had last seen him years ago during the demonstration that had saved Zira's participation in the original program. Age had made him more distinguished but also somehow more approachable. Honored representatives, Elder Vrex began, I speak as someone who initially opposed the integration of our young people into these human-led programs. I believed that exposure to foreign influences would weaken their connection to Kytherian values. His markings shifted to patterns of formal acknowledgement. I was wrong. The young beings who have participated in the Kepler Protocol programs have become the strongest advocates and most knowledgeable practitioners of Kytherian culture our people have produced in generations. He looked directly at Zira. Senior Specialist Zira has taught Kytherian analytical methods to beings from 37 different species. In doing so, she has preserved and propagated our cultural heritage more effectively than centuries of traditional isolation. Marcus saw Zira's markings brighten with gratitude and respect for her elder's words. But, more than preservation, Elder Vrex continued, she has demonstrated that our methods have value beyond our own people. This knowledge has given our entire species a new sense of purpose and pride in our contributions to galactic civilization. Representative Veltar spoke again. Elder Vrex, are you prepared to recommend full adoption of the Kepler Protocol despite its human origins? Elder Vrex's response carried the weight of formal cultural commitment. I am prepared to state that any species that does not adopt these protocols will find itself at a significant disadvantage in all future interspecies endeavors. This is not merely about cooperation, it is about survival and growth in a galaxy where isolation is no longer viable. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives grappled with the implications of this statement. President Zarthal of the Council called for order. We have heard testimony supporting adoption of the Kepler Protocol. Are there any representatives prepared to speak against the proposal? Marcus held his breath as the chamber remained silent. After several minutes, it became clear that no opposing voices would emerge. Then, we proceed to formal voting, President Zarthal announced. All in favor of adopting the Kepler Protocol as the standard framework for interspecies integration colonies? The voting display showed an overwhelming majority in favor, 842 civilizations supporting adoption, 23 abstaining, and only 3 opposing. As the results were announced, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. What had begun with a simple act of inclusion, reaching out to help a lonely child, had become the foundation for a new era of galactic cooperation. In the celebration that followed the vote, Marcus found himself surrounded by congratulations from beings representing dozens of species. But, the moment he treasured most came when Zira approached him with tears of joy in her violet eyes. Dr. Chan, she said, her voice thick with emotion, do you remember what you told me that first day? That sometimes the most important things we do require a leap of faith? I remember. Thank you for taking that leap. Not just for me, but for everyone who will benefit from what we built together. Marcus smiled, thinking of all the lonely children throughout the galaxy who would never have to sit alone on benches, watching others play games they thought they couldn't join. Thank you for proving that the leap was worth taking, he replied. As the celebration continued around them, Marcus reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. A simple question, can I join you? Had become a universal principle, a reminder that inclusion and understanding were always possible when people chose courage over fear, curiosity over suspicion, and hope over prejudice. The future of galactic civilization would be built on those choices, one friendship at a time, one act of inclusion at a time, one moment of seeing possibility instead of limitation at a time. And it had all started with a human father who believed that every child deserved a chance to belong, and a young alien girl who was brave enough to ask if she could join the game. In the years to come, historians would mark this day as the beginning of the true integration era, when the galaxy's civilizations finally learned to see their differences as strengths rather than weaknesses. But, for Marcus, Emma, Zira, and all the friends who had started this remarkable journey, it would always be remembered as the day when a simple act of kindness changed everything. The galaxy had learned that the most profound revolutions often began with the smallest gestures of inclusion, and that the future belonged to those brave enough to reach across the unknown and say, "Yes, you can join us. There's always room for one more."